The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of courtroom 302, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Sarah Bennett stood quietly at the defendant's table, her hands clasped together to hide their slight trembling. At 32 years old, she had never imagined herself in this position. Her dark brown eyes, usually bright with warmth when teaching her third-grade students, now held a mix of confusion and growing concern. Judge William Harrison's footsteps echoed through the quiet courtroom as he entered. Everyone rose, following traditional court protocol. At first glance, he looked like what most people expected a judge to look like: gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and an expensive black robe that seemed to make him larger than life. But there was something cold in his pale blue eyes as they settled on Sarah. Case number 2024 CR 789, State versus Sarah Bennett. The court clerk announced, her voice clear and professional. Sarah watched as Judge Harrison's expression changed when he looked down at her file. His face, previously neutral, hardened slightly. She noticed how his jaw tightened and his fingers gripped the papers more firmly. 10 years of teaching had made her good at reading people's subtle reactions, and something about his response made her stomach knot with worry. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Harrison said, drawing out her name in a way that made it sound like an accusation, "you're here for what appears to be a simple traffic violation. Running a red light, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes, Your Honor." Sarah replied softly but clearly. She stood straight, wearing the same blue dress she often wore while teaching. Her father had always taught her to face challenges with dignity. The security cameras hummed quietly in the corners of the courtroom, their red lights blinking steadily as they recorded everything. Nobody paid them much attention. They were just part of the standard courthouse equipment. But today, they would capture something important. "I see here you're a teacher?" Judge Harrison's tone carried an edge that made several people in the courtroom shift uncomfortably. "Yes, Your Honor. I teach third grade at Lincoln Elementary. I've been there for 8 years," Sarah answered, trying to keep her voice steady. She couldn't understand why a simple traffic ticket hearing felt so intense. The court-appointed attorney beside her, Mr. Peters, remained unusually quiet. He hadn't said more than 2 words to Sarah before the hearing began, and now he seemed more interested in organizing his papers than defending his client. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his glasses catching the morning light. "Interesting. And you were in quite a hurry that morning, weren't you? Rushing through that red light without any concern for others." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. This wasn't normal for a traffic violation hearing. "Your Honor, I apologize for my mistake. The light had just changed, and I was..." Silence. Judge Harrison's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "I find it deeply troubling that someone responsible for shaping young minds shows such disregard for the law." The few people sitting in the courtroom benches began to whisper. Even the court clerk looked up from her computer with surprise. This kind of reaction to a traffic violation was unusual, to say the least. Sarah felt her legs grow weak as Judge Harrison shuffled through more papers on his desk. Through the windows, she could see the City Hall building where her father, Mayor Richardson, usually worked. He was away at an important conference, and she hadn't wanted to bother him with something as minor as a traffic ticket. Now, she wished he was here. "Your Honor." She tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I accept full responsibility for my mistake." Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Miss Bennett, I have some very interesting reports here. Reports that suggest your vehicle matches the description of one seen leaving the scene of several recent incidents in our community." The whispers in the courtroom grew louder. Sarah's mouth went dry. This couldn't be happening. There must be some mistake. Mr. Peters, her attorney, finally stirred beside her, but only to shuffle his papers again. The morning sun had moved higher now, and the shadows in the courtroom had shifted. But the darkness in Judge Harrison's eyes remained fixed as he prepared to continue, unaware that the security cameras were recording every word, every gesture, and every sign of his prejudice. Unaware that his next actions would set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of the city's justice system. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across courtroom 302 as Sarah Bennett stood for her sentencing. The room was unusually full now, word having spread about the strange turn of events in what should have been a simple traffic case. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious onlookers, concerned teachers from Lincoln Elementary, and local reporters who sensed something was very wrong. Judge Harrison sat high on his bench, looking down at Sarah with cold eyes. His black robe seemed darker than usual in the afternoon light, matching the expression on his face. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Harrison's voice cut through the silence, "this court has reviewed the evidence connecting you to 3 unsolved robberies in our community." He shuffled papers on his desk, though Sarah noticed he barely glanced at them. Sarah's court-appointed attorney, Mr. Peters, sat beside her, doodling on his legal pad. He hadn't filed any motions to dismiss the charges. He hadn't challenged the lack of evidence. He hadn't even called any witnesses to speak about Sarah's character. When Sarah had tried to talk to him before the hearing, he had simply said, "Let's see what the judge decides." Several of Sarah's students' parents sat in the back row. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter Maria was in Sarah's class, clutched a handful of children's drawings. Pictures from Sarah's students showing their teacher with hearts and smiles. They had planned to present them to the judge, but Mr. Peters had waved them away. "Your Honor?" Sarah's voice trembled slightly. "I've never been involved in any robbery. I'm a teacher. My students—" Silence. Judge Harrison's fist came down hard on his desk. "This court has evidence that your vehicle matches descriptions from 3 separate incidents. Furthermore, your reckless behavior in running that red light shows a complete disregard for law and order." The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, recording every word. Her eyes darted between Sarah and the judge, her expression showing increasing concern. In her 15 years of court reporting, she had never seen charges escalate like this without any substantial evidence. "But there's no actual proof." Sarah tried again, her hands gripping the edge of the defense table. "The only thing you have is that my car is black, like thousands of other cars in this city." Judge Harrison's face darkened. "Are you questioning this court's authority, Miss Bennett?" He leaned forward, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. "That kind of disrespect only confirms my suspicions about your character." In the gallery, Marcus Chen scribbled furiously in his notepad. Every word, every gesture, every irregularity in procedure, he captured it all. His years of experience told him this wasn't just judicial misconduct, this was something far more sinister. Therefore, Judge Harrison continued, his voice rising, "Given the severity of these crimes and your obvious lack of remorse, this court sentences you to 125 years in state prison." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Mrs. Rodriguez began to cry. 2 other teachers from Lincoln Elementary stood up in protest, but were quickly silenced by the bailiff. Sarah felt her knees go weak. 125 years? For a traffic violation and crimes she had nothing to do with? Her mind went to her students, to her family, to her father who still didn't know what was happening because of his conference. Mr. Peters didn't even stand up to object. He just closed his notebook and began packing his briefcase. "This is insane." Someone shouted from the back of the courtroom. "She's a teacher, not a criminal." "Order." Judge Harrison shouted, banging his gavel. "One more outburst and I'll clear this courtroom. Bailiff, take Ms. Bennett into custody immediately." As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, Sarah stood tall, just as she did every morning in front of her class. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she kept her head high. Through the courthouse windows, she could see the City Hall building where her father's office sat empty, waiting for his return. The security cameras continued their silent recording, capturing every moment of this judicial travesty. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Chen's investigation was about to expose the dark truth behind Judge Harrison's courtroom. But for now, Sarah Bennett, beloved 3rd-grade teacher and daughter of Mayor Richardson, was being led away in handcuffs, leaving behind a courtroom full of shocked faces and breaking hearts. Marcus Chen sat at his messy desk in the back corner of the Daily Chronicle newsroom, staring intently at his computer screen. Coffee cups and scattered papers surrounded him, evidence of 3 sleepless nights spent digging through court records. As a reporter for 15 years, he had developed a nose for stories that didn't add up, and Sarah Bennett's case had set off all his alarms. "This can't be right," he muttered, pushing his dark-rimmed glasses up his nose. The spreadsheet on his screen told a disturbing story. Over the past 5 years, Judge Harrison had sentenced white defendants to an average of 2 years for drug possession, while black defendants received an average of 8 years for the same crime. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The newsroom hummed with activity around him that Marcus barely noticed. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he pulled up more cases. Traffic violations turned into felony charges. Minor offenses became major sentences, and the one common thread: the race of the defendants. His phone buzzed, displaying a message from a court clerk who wished to remain anonymous. Check cases hashtag 2019 CR 456 and hashtag 2020 CR 789. Same charges, different races, very different sentences. Meanwhile, across the state, Mayor James Richardson sat in a conference room, completely unaware of what was happening to his daughter. The municipal conference had his full attention as city leaders discussed urban development projects. His phone remained silent in his pocket, set to Do Not Disturb for the important meeting. Back in the newsroom, Marcus printed another stack of court documents. Red marker in hand, he began circling dates, names, and sentences, connecting them with lines on a large court board. The pattern grew clearer with each case he added. "Hey, Chen," his editor called from across the room. "Tell me you're working on something good. The morning meeting needs stories." Marcus waved him over, lowering his voice as his editor approached. "Remember Sarah Bennett's traffic violation hearing this morning? It just turned into something much bigger. Judge Harrison connected her to 3 unsolved robberies with zero evidence. Look at this pattern I found." The editor's eyes widened as he looked at the corkboard. "Are these numbers verified?" "Triple-checked," Marcus replied, pulling up more documents. "And there's more. I found a connection between Harrison and private prison corporations. Every time he hands out an extreme sentence to a person of color, that same prison corporation gets paid more by the state for housing inmates." Across town, the courthouse security office was changing shifts. Officer Rodriguez was showing the morning's footage to his replacement when something caught his eye. "Wait. Go back," he said, rewinding the video from courtroom 302. They watched Judge Harrison's behavior during Sarah's hearing again, this time paying close attention to his body language and tone. "Save this footage," Rodriguez instructed. "Something's not right here." Marcus's phone rang again. This time it was an ex-clerk who had worked for Judge Harrison 5 years ago. "I saw your name asking around about the judge," the voice said nervously. "There's something you should know about how he keeps 2 different sets of sentencing guidelines in his chambers." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the newsroom windows as Marcus organized his evidence. Photos of Judge Harrison at private prison corporation events. Documentation of campaign contributions from those same corporations. Statements from former employees. Statistical analysis of his sentencing patterns. And now, Sarah Bennett's case, perhaps the most blatant example yet of his prejudice. In his rush to make an example of Sarah, Judge Harrison had made a crucial mistake. He had chosen the wrong target, not knowing her connection to the mayor. But more importantly, he had finally become too bold, too obvious in his discrimination. Marcus looked at the clock. 6:45 p.m. Mayor Richardson would be finishing his conference soon. The story was almost ready, but it needed one more piece. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee. "This is Marcus Chen from the Daily Chronicle," he said when they answered. "I'm calling about Judge William Harrison, and I have evidence of serious judicial misconduct that you need to see." As Marcus spoke, Sarah Bennett sat in a holding cell, still in her blue teaching dress, unaware that the truth was already beginning to unravel. And somewhere in that same building, Judge Harrison sat in his chambers, feeling satisfied with another day's work, not knowing that his carefully constructed world of prejudice and profit was about to come crashing down. The security footage from courtroom 302 continued to back up silently to several secure servers, preserving every moment of what would soon become a landmark case in judicial accountability. Mayor James Richardson's private jet touched down at the city airport just as the evening news was breaking his daughter's story. He sat in the plane, loosening his tie after 3 days of conferences, completely unaware that his world was about to shatter. "Sir," his assistant, Jennifer, said softly, her face pale as she looked at her phone. "You need to see this." She handed him her phone, open to a live news broadcast. The mayor's dark eyes widened as he read the headline scrolling across the screen. "Local teacher sentenced to 125 years. Judge Harrison under investigation for racial bias." Then he saw the photo of the teacher, his daughter Sarah. What in God's name? He whispered, his hands beginning to shake. When did this happen? Why wasn't I notified immediately? Sarah didn't want to bother you at the conference, Jennifer explained, gathering the mayor's bags. It started as a simple traffic ticket, but then, the mayor didn't wait to hear more. He rushed off the plane, his security details scrambling to keep up. His phone was already at his ear. Get me the chief of police, the district attorney, and my personal lawyer. Conference call. Now. Outside the airport, the evening sky had turned an angry red. Social media was exploding with the story. Videos of Sarah's sentencing were going viral, shared by her students' parents and community members. Hashtag Justice for Sarah was already trending. The mayor's black SUV sped through the city streets, its emergency lights flashing. Inside, Mayor Richardson watched more footage on his phone, his daughter standing alone, that incompetent court-appointed lawyer doing nothing. Judge Harrison's face twisted with obvious prejudice. Turn left, he suddenly ordered his driver. We're going to the jail first. At the county jail, Sarah sat in a holding cell, still in her blue teaching dress. She looked up as footsteps echoed down the corridor. Her father appeared at the bars, his usual composed demeanor cracking at the sight of his daughter behind them. Daddy, she whispered, using the name she hadn't called him since she was little. Baby girl, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm going to fix this, I promise you that. While father and daughter reunited, the city was awakening to the injustice. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Parents of Sarah's students held signs reading Free Ms. Bennett and Stop Judicial Racism. Local news vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the growing protest. Mayor Richardson's phone rang constantly as he left the jail. The governor wanted to talk. Civil rights organizations were calling. National news networks were requesting interviews. But the mayor had only one destination in mind, his office. Jennifer, he said as they rode the elevator to the mayor's office, I want every case Judge Harrison has presided over in the last 10 years on my desk by morning. Every single one. The mayor's office came alive despite the late hour. Staff members rushed in, carrying files, laptops, and cups of coffee. The mayor stood at his window, looking out at the city he had served for 3 terms. The city where his daughter now sat in a jail cell because of a racist judge's prejudice. His personal lawyer, David Martinez, arrived first. James, he said, skipping the usual formalities, I've reviewed the court transcripts. This is the most blatant case of judicial misconduct I've seen in 30 years of practice. I don't want to just overturn this sentence, the mayor replied, his voice steely. I want to expose everything. Every biased ruling, every connection to private prisons, every dirty deal. Nobody does this to my daughter or anyone else's child and gets away with it. On the mayor's desk, his phone lit up with a message from Marcus Chen. Mr. Mayor, I have evidence of Judge Harrison's connection to private prison corporations. Meeting. Outside, the protest crowd had grown larger. News helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights illuminating the gathering storm of public outrage. In his chambers, Judge Harrison was about to learn that the mayor had returned. And with him, the full force of justice was about to rain down on a corrupt system. Mayor Richardson picked up his phone to reply to Marcus. His daughter's photo smiled at him from his desk, taken at her classroom on the first day of school. Hold on, baby girl, he whispered. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The FBI field office buzzed with activity at 7 a.m. as Special Agent Lisa Torres spread documents across her desk. 3 days had passed since Sarah Bennett's sentencing, and what started as a local investigation had exploded into a federal case. Look at this, she said to her partner, Agent Mike Reynolds, pointing to a bank statement. Judge Harrison received monthly payments from Shell Company XYZ, which traces back to Private Prisons United. Every time he fills their cells, he gets a bonus. The morning sun streamed through the office windows as they worked. Coffee cups littered their desks, evidence of another sleepless night following money trails and connecting dots. Meanwhile, Marcus Chen sat in a small coffee shop across from Mr. Peters, Sarah's court-appointed attorney. The reporter watched as the nervous lawyer stirred his coffee endlessly, avoiding eye contact. So, Marcus said quietly, Want to tell me why you didn't defend Sarah Bennett? Or should I tell you what we found in your bank records? Peter's hand shook, spilling coffee on the table. "You don't understand," he whispered. "They have a system. Judge Harrison picks the cases. We public defenders get paid extra to stay quiet. If we fight too hard, we never get assigned cases again." Across town, Mayor Richardson sat in an emergency meeting with the State Bar Association. The large conference room was packed with investigators, civil rights attorneys, and Judicial Review Board members. In the past 5 years, a civil rights attorney named Rachel Washington explained, pointing to a large screen, "Judge Harrison has sentenced minorities to terms averaging 15 years longer than white defendants for identical crimes. The pattern is undeniable." The mayor's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Torres. "Found the smoking gun. Harrison owns shares in 3 private prisons through offshore accounts. Meeting in 30 minutes?" Back at the FBI office, Agent Torres and Reynolds interviewed a former clerk from Judge Harrison's office. The young woman twisted her hands nervously as she spoke. "He kept 2 sets of sentencing guidelines," she explained, her voice trembling. "One for white defendants, one for minorities. He thought it was funny. He called it maintaining order in society." In the county jail, Sarah received unexpected visitors. 3 former defendants from Judge Harrison's court, all minorities, all serving excessive sentences for minor offenses. Their families had reached out to the mayor's office after hearing about Sarah's case. "We're here to help," one woman told Sarah through the visitor's glass. "What he did to us, to you, it needs to stop." Marcus Chen's story was nearly ready. His computer screen showed the headline, "Justice for Sale, Inside Judge Harrison's Racist Empire." But before he could publish, his phone rang. It was an anonymous tip. "Check the courthouse basement storage," the voice said. "Box 2546, Harrison's old law firm files. You'll find drafts of his deal with the private prisons." Agent Torres and her team arrived at the courthouse within the hour. In the dusty basement, Box 2546 revealed everything: contracts, memos, emails discussing population management in coded racist terms. "My God," Torres breathed, reading through the files. "He's been doing this for 20 years. Mr. Peters, cracking under the pressure, finally agreed to wear a wire. That afternoon, he met with Judge Harrison in a park, supposedly to discuss another case. "The Bennett case is causing trouble," Peters said nervously. Harrison laughed coldly. "Let them investigate. All my tracks are covered. Besides, one less troublemaker teaching our kids is a good thing." Unknown to Harrison, FBI agents recorded every word from vans parked nearby. Agent Torres smiled grimly as she listened. "We got him," she whispered. By evening, the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, secret files, recorded conversations, documented patterns of discrimination, and dozens of witnesses ready to testify. Mayor Richardson stood in his office, looking at a photo of young Sarah at her college graduation. Agent Torres had just left after sharing their findings. "Sir," Jennifer said from the doorway, "the FBI is ready to move whenever you give the word." The mayor nodded, his face set with determination. "Tell them to proceed. And Jennifer? Call the press. It's time everyone knows exactly who Judge Harrison really is." Outside, the sun set on another day, but the lights in the FBI office, the newsroom, and the mayor's office stayed bright. The next morning would bring a reckoning that would shake the justice system to its core. The morning dawned with an unusual sight outside Lincoln Elementary School, where children usually played. Now stood hundreds of parents, teachers, and community members. They carried signs reading "Free Ms. Bennett" and "Stop Judicial Racism." Maria Rodriguez, Sarah's 8-year-old student, held up a poster she had made showing her teacher surrounded by hearts. "My daughter cries every night," Mrs. Rodriguez told the news cameras that had gathered. "She doesn't understand why someone could take her favorite teacher away just because of the color of her skin." Inside Sarah's empty classroom, her calendar still showed tomorrow's lesson plans. Little notes from students covered her desk, their childish handwriting asking when she would return. The sight brought tears to the principal's eyes as she walked past. Across the city, different groups began to unite. Church congregations joined with civil rights organizations. Business owners closed their shops to join the protests. College students organized social media campaigns that were going viral by the hour. "Look at this," Marcus Chen said to his editor, showing him his phone. Hashtag Justice for Sarah was just mentioned on national news. We're trending worldwide. At the courthouse, the scene was even more dramatic. Thousands of people formed a peaceful human chain around the building. They came from all walks of life. Lawyers in suits stood next to factory workers in uniforms. Teachers brought their classes to give civics lessons in real time. Judge Harrison tried to enter through the back door, but cameras caught him anyway. "Judge Harrison," reporters called out, "what do you say to allegations that you've been profiting from racist sentencing?" The judge hurried inside without comment, his face red with anger. But today, his courtroom sat empty. Every defense attorney in the city had called in sick, a coordinated protest against judicial corruption. Meanwhile, Sarah's students took matters into their own hands. During art class, they created hundreds of cards and letters. 8-year-old Tommy wrote, "Dear important people, Ms. Bennett taught us that everyone is equal. Why didn't the judge learn this lesson?" The letters began arriving at every official's office in the state: the governor, state representatives, attorney general. Each envelope contained a child's plea for justice, often accompanied by crayon drawings of their beloved teacher. At noon, the city's religious leaders organized a prayer vigil in the park. Christians, Muslims, Jews, and others gathered together, their different prayers united in one cause. The imam from the local mosque spoke first. "When injustice happens to one of us, it happens to all of us." Mayor Richardson watched the growing crowds from his office window. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since morning. Civil rights leaders from across the country were flying in. National news networks had set up mobile studios in the city square. "Sir," Jennifer said, entering with more reports, "the State Bar Association just announced an emergency hearing for tomorrow, and the governor is on line 1. In the county jail, Sarah received so many letters that the guards had to bring them in boxes. Her students' parents had organized a rotation, making sure someone visited every day so she wouldn't feel alone. By late afternoon, the protests had grown even larger. People brought food and water to share. Local musicians set up and began playing freedom songs. Children from Sarah's class took turns speaking into megaphones, telling stories about their teacher. "Miss Bennett helped me learn to read," one little boy said, his voice shaking. "She never gave up on me, so we can't give up on her." The movement had taken on a life of its own. Social media couldn't keep up with the hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Sarah. Hashtag Stop Judicial Racism. Hashtag Teachers Stand with Sarah. Each one trending, each one spreading the story further. As the sun began to set, the protesters lit thousands of candles. From above, news helicopters captured the beautiful sight, a city united in its demand for justice, its light pushing back against the darkness of racism and corruption. Inside her cell, Sarah could hear distant chants from the protesters. She closed her eyes, holding her students' letters close to her heart. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt hope. The community had risen, and its voice would not be silenced until justice was served. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension on Monday morning. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Inside the main courtroom, every seat was filled as Mayor Richardson's legal team prepared to present their case against Judge Harrison. FBI Special Agent Torres stood at the podium, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the Judicial Review Board. Behind her, a large screen showed documents, bank statements, and photographs, evidence collected over countless sleepless nights. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what we have uncovered is not just one case of injustice. We have revealed a criminal enterprise masked as a court of law." The room fell silent as she clicked to the first slide. It showed a complex web of offshore accounts, all leading back to Judge Harrison. Each account had received regular payments from private prison corporations. For every person of color Judge Harrison sent to prison with an excessive sentence, Torres explained, he received a bonus. The longer the sentence, the bigger the payment. In the front row, Marcus Chen typed furiously on his laptop, documenting every word. Next to him sat Mr. Peters, the former court-appointed attorney, now turned state's witness. His hands trembled as he waited for his turn to testify. Judge Harrison sat with his lawyers, his face growing paler with each piece of evidence. When they played the recording from his conversation with Peters in the park, he loosened his collar, sweat visible on his forehead. "One less troublemaker teaching our kids is a good thing," His own voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. Several people gasped at the coldness in his tone. Mayor Richardson's personal lawyer, David Martinez, stepped forward next. "We have reviewed every case Judge Harrison presided over in the past decade," he announced. "The pattern is undeniable." The screen behind him filled with statistics. Graphs showed the stark difference in sentencing between white defendants and defendants of color. Bank records revealed payments increasing with each harsh sentence. But perhaps most damning, Martinez continued, pulling out a worn leather notebook, is this. The notebook was Judge Harrison's personal diary, discovered in his chamber safe by FBI agents. As Martinez read entries aloud, Judge Harrison's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Another productive month," Martinez read. 30 more undesirables off the streets. The private prison board will be pleased. Bonus should be substantial." Mr. Peters took the stand next, his voice shaky but determined. He described the system of kickbacks, the pressure to keep quiet, the threats against lawyers who tried to fight back. With each word, Judge Harrison seemed to shrink in his chair. During a brief recess, Sarah was brought in from jail. She sat with her father, both of them watching as justice finally began to unfold. Her students' parents filled several rows, and in the back, her entire class had come to watch, each wearing a shirt that read, "Ms. Bennett taught us about justice." The final blow came when Agent Torres presented evidence of Harrison's connection to 3 different private prison corporations. Bank records showed millions of dollars in hidden payments over the years. Photos revealed secret meetings with prison executives. "Your Honors," Torres concluded, "Judge Harrison didn't just fail to serve justice. He actively sold it to the highest bidder, and he used racial prejudice to maximize his profits." The Judicial Review Board needed less than an hour to reach their decision. As they filed back into the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The head of the board, Justice Eleanor Matthews, stood slowly. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented today, this board finds William Harrison guilty of judicial misconduct, corruption, and civil rights violations on an unprecedented scale." She paused, looking directly at Harrison. "We recommend immediate disbarment, criminal prosecution, and a complete review of every case he has presided over. Furthermore, all current sentences handed down by Judge Harrison are hereby suspended pending review." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Sarah burst into tears as her father hugged her tight. Her students in the back row jumped up and down, their young faces bright with joy. As federal marshals led Judge Harrison away in handcuffs, he finally showed emotion, anger twisting his face as he realized his empire of corruption had crumbled. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, shining down on the celebrating crowd. Justice, true justice, had finally been revealed. 1 month after Judge Harrison's arrest, Sarah Bennett stood at the front of her classroom again. Colorful welcome back signs decorated the walls, and her students' faces beamed with joy as they sat at their desks, finally reunited with their beloved teacher. "Good morning, class," Sarah said, her voice warm and steady. The nightmare was over, but its impact had created waves of change throughout the entire justice system. Across town, in the federal courthouse, Judge Harrison sat in an orange jumpsuit, listening as the judge read out his sentence. The man who had given Sarah 125 years for a traffic violation now faced 30 years in federal prison for corruption, civil rights violations, and racketeering. "William Harrison," the new judge declared, "you have betrayed the sacred trust of your office and turned justice into a commodity to be bought and sold. Your actions have harmed countless lives and shaken the very foundation of our legal system." Mayor Richardson watched from the gallery as Harrison was led away in chains. Next to him sat Marcus Chen, whose explosive reporting had earned him a Pulitzer Prize nomination. But the mayor's work wasn't done, it was just beginning. In his office later that day, Mayor Richardson signed a historic executive order creating the Equal Justice Initiative. The program would review every case of possible judicial bias in the city's history and provide legal assistance to those wrongly convicted. "This fund," he announced to the gathered press, "will ensure that no other family has to experience what my daughter and countless others have endured. Today, we begin the real work of healing our justice system." Sarah's case had sparked a national movement. Other cities began investigating their judges' sentencing patterns. Private prison corporations faced federal investigations. Court-appointed attorney systems underwent complete overhauls. Back in her classroom, Sarah used her experience to teach her students about justice in a way no textbook could. Sometimes, she told them during a civics lesson, standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's always important. Little Maria Rodriguez raised her hand. "Miss Bennett, my mommy says you helped change the whole world. Is that true?" Sarah smiled, thinking of all the changes happening across the country. "No, Maria, we'd all changed it together. The city established new oversight committees. Every judge's sentencing records would now be regularly reviewed for bias. Body cameras became mandatory in courtrooms. Court-appointed attorneys received better pay and resources to properly defend their clients. Mr. Peters, the former court-appointed attorney who had helped expose the corruption, now led training sessions for new public defenders. Never be silent, he told them. Your duty is to justice, not to judges. Late one evening, Mayor Richardson and Sarah sat in their family home, looking through letters that continued to pour in from around the country. Stories of similar injustices, thanks for their courage, and hope for continued change filled each envelope. "Dad," Sarah said softly, "remember when you used to tell me one person could make a difference?" He nodded, remembering all the bedtime stories he'd told her about civil rights heroes. "I understand now," she continued. "But it's not just one person. It's one person who inspires others to stand up too." The city had changed. Where Judge Harrison's portrait once hung in the courthouse, now there was a mural painted by Sarah's students. It showed Lady Justice, her blindfold raised, surrounded by faces of all colors, with words reading, "Justice sees everyone equally." Agent Torres and her FBI team had expanded their investigation nationwide, uncovering similar schemes in other jurisdictions. Their work was leading to more arrests, more reforms, and more hope for true justice. 1 year after her ordeal began, Sarah stood on a stage next to her father. They were launching the Bennett Justice Foundation, an organization dedicated to fighting judicial corruption and racial bias in the legal system. "My story," Sarah told the crowd, "is just one of many, but together we can ensure it's one of the last. Change doesn't come from courtrooms alone. It comes from communities standing together, demanding better, and never giving up until justice is truly blind to color." As she finished speaking, her students led the audience in a standing ovation. In the back of the hall, Marcus Chen smiled as he wrote his headline, "From Injustice to Inspiration: How One Case Changed American Justice Forever." The system had been broken, but from its pieces, something better was being built. And in classrooms, courtrooms, and communities across America, the work of true justice continued.